From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis for another day. We're glad to have you with us. Today we're going to talk about, indirectly, my dear mother, because she labored every day of her working career in one factory or another, and for a long time she soldered resistors into chassis that became Zenith televisions. But she lived long enough to see that job eliminated, first by miniaturizations and other advances, and ultimately by automation. And as gifted as my mom was, and she couldn't work as fast or as accurately as even those crude robotics that they put in there in the 1970s. But the irony was that those TVs had more features and they were more reliable, and because they were cheaper, suddenly we all became multi-TV households, right? Well, then kind of a similar thing happened in the 90s and in the aughts. Remember the big controversies over the $16.95 DVD players at Walmart and Target? Labor hated them because they were made in automated factories thousands of miles away, and the conventional wisdom held that these machines were putting Americans out of jobs. But those DVD players begat Netflix, and they stimulated demand for quality movies and TV like we'd never seen before. They put thousands and thousands of people to work building the infrastructure around the distribution of DVDs at first, and then later digital signals over cable and fiber optics. And at any given moment in history, there are winning and losing technologies. And that's what we're seeing today in our transition from coal to zero emission energy sources. And one of the biggest drivers has been cheap, readily available solar panels. And those panels, they're not employing very many people in their actual manufacture, but they've put 1,300,000 people to work in the United States installing them and designing custom installations for them. And, you know, what are we, about 5% of the way finished with all the solar installs we could potentially do in this country? So what does our government do? It imposes tariffs on foreign solar panels to try to protect those couple of thousand manufacturing jobs that remain in the United States while undercutting the hundreds of thousands of people making good livings installing them. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Technology, the march of technology, and how we can benefit from it, but we also have to be careful about it. I'm very happy to have Lisa Albrecht with us today. Lisa, glad to have you here. Lisa is with the Illinois Solar Energy Association, and also you're a business owner too, right?
Not an owner, but I do design systems. I work at Solar Service.
Oh, so you're an employee at Solar Service up in Niles. So I've heard you talk about this, and I thought, let's talk about this on Chicago Newsroom today, because it is really the issue of our time. There is a debate about these solar panels. We used to make them, well, we still do make them in the United States, but they're more expensive. China makes them more cheaply. Does that matter?
You know, it does. I think when you, like you started out, when we look at the big scope, that's the most important part of the conversation. So whether it's the transition from dirty energy to clean energy, we should be doing that rapidly. We know the damage that we're causing on a day-to-day basis. The best way to do that is to make it as affordable as possible so that it's within reach of individual consumers and businesses. We're seeing a massive shift from many Fortune 500 companies that are looking to have cleaner energy resources. We've seen a big movement since the U.S. started to leave the Paris Accord, where people have said, you know what? No, what can I do as a citizen? And so people have wanted to do this. And so just in the last few years, we've seen a massive shift of consumers looking to put solar on their rooftop all across the country. And I think it's important that we work to make sure that those things are affordable.
And we should actually just spend a moment to say that people were cynical about solar for a long time, and I think some of it had to do with just the cost of it. But when people actually began to see the economic benefit that you could get a couple of, maybe 10 years of repayment on it, but that your electric bill gets cut, significantly, in some cases all the way to zero. That is what has driven this move to solar has been the fact that the price has come down to the point that you can have a conversation about it. It's not just a fantasy.
Yep. Well, by driving scores of households, particularly in the California market. Most people think that solar is really big in the California market because you have a lot more granola tree huggers. In reality, they're paying 3 to 4 times more for their electricity than we pay today. And so there was a shift because households just needed to figure out how to manage their budgets. You know, if you have an ever escalating fee just going out every single month, you know, you're renting your power every single month to the utility, and instead solar allows you to own it as an investment, and you can get those dollars back. So we started to see that infiltrate the rest of the country too. The Midwest is lagging behind, but that's mostly because we have lower electric rates and our incentives have been uncertain. And so, but now that we have, particularly here in Illinois, we have just passed the Future Energy Jobs Act, which actually will create certainty from now through 2025 to 2030. We were going every 6 months and just telling consumers, well, we don't know if we have something for you or not. And that certainty is poised to really move the drivers forward rapidly right now.
But it's undeniable, I suppose, that the biggest factor that drove solar down to the point that it became so popular was that the price of the solar panels went down.
Dramatically. In fact, there has been tremendous investment, not just mind share from organizations like our national labs working on the R&D side, but also investment in helping manufacturers bring down those manufacturing costs. And then China really did a great job, and the rest of Asia, in bringing those prices down so that commodity prices dropped significantly. You're comparing a kilowatt hour from the utility to a kilowatt hour on your roof, and it needs to make logical sense.
Right.
Honestly, most of the time people pick up the phone because maybe the environment was bothering them, but the reason they sign the contracts is the economics make total sense.
I mean, in the Commonwealth Edison service area, what does a kilowatt hour cost?
Roughly 10 cents or so per kilowatt hour.
So a dime, and when you finish a single-family home, what is their cost?
If I look at the amount of energy that they're going to produce over 25 years, they actually end up paying about 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour installed. So less than the utility charges you today, and you don't have inflation costs on top of that, ever-raising costs.
That's what I was going to say. Let's not forget your price stays the same.
Right.
Because the sun doesn't change; it doesn't bill you higher.
Exactly. So you have a fixed rate of energy on your roof for the next 30 years, and I can say that because the manufacturer warranty on that product is 25 years. My toaster doesn't last a year anymore. Because it's designed obsolescence. So these are actually designed to last.
But it's also important to say that this is an area where innovation is still alive and well. So 10 years from now, you'll be installing solar panels that are way more efficient than the ones you're putting in today.
I think not only more efficient, but I think they'll also probably look different, and how they're applied will be different. I mean, there's research right now that, for example, spray paint that creates energy. Tesla has the whole solar roof. There's a see-through window, basically piece of photovoltaic that, just imagine, like the Sears Tower actually has some of it now. I should say Willis Tower, I'll date myself in Chicago here.
Hey.
But they actually have some experimental windows that include that as well. So if you start really to look at what surfaces in society see the sun, and can those produce electricity, it gets really exciting.
I've been reading about this stuff called, what is it, perovskite? I saw the New York Times did a story about something that can be printed. It can be printed on rolls, and it costs almost nothing to print, and who knows.
It's really exciting, and it's hard to say. People say to me, well, when I have to replace my roof, because we do want to put solar on a good roof, when I need to replace my roof, what will I do? And I'm like, by that time, who knows? It will probably be so easy. And when I get the chance to talk to third graders all the time, and I tell them, when my grandparents, they actually had a house without plumbing. We wouldn't think of that today. My vision is that we will never build a house without solar. It doesn't make sense.
But I think maybe you're being a little closed-minded about this, because right now we're moving back toward coal, so we should be thinking about putting coal boilers in the basement.
It's funny. I actually saw this an ad today.
My house, when I bought it, still had a coal burner.
The chutes.
The octopus down in the basement, and a room just for coal. And I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't have torn all that out.
Right. We could go back. Coal's coming back any day now. Let's hope not.
We're making fun of this, but I mean, this is kind of our national policy now.
Yeah. Well, and that's the frustrating thing of these tariffs that have been proposed.
That's what we're
talking about is these tariffs.
I never quite got around to pointing out that the reason we're having this conversation today is because our beloved president has imposed tariffs on solar panels that are imported into the United States, and that is going to create all kinds of problems. But ostensibly, part of the reason for that is so that we can support coal and keep coal strong.
Well, it's hard to completely accurately know for sure that you can connect the dots, but when you look at the history of who's working in his cabinet and what industries they used to work in, it's a heavily fossil fuel based industry,
extractive bunch of guys, isn't it?
Yeah. Precisely. And so lo and behold, there's policy that's going to keep them, keep their pockets lined a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I think people going into this, I saw a lot of sensationalism, on the news. People were panicking. I don't think it's going to kill the industry. It's going to slow things down a little bit. People were buying solar panels 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Basically, it's putting us back there in terms of price, but the prices will continue to come down. We get more efficiencies all the time.
Let's get specific about what it is. What is the tariff and what does it apply to?
So it's a 30% import tax on panels that are brought into the U.S. primarily from Asia. There was a list of excluded countries, but I don't know that
Florida with the oil
Ghana.
drilling.
Well, Ghana is excluded, but I don't know that there's much manufacturing of solar panels happening in Ghana today. The majority of it, like my cell phone, like the Zenith televisions, that's all in Asia. That's where high technologies are being produced today. And so it'll be a 30% tax just on the solar panels themselves. So the solar panels are just a portion of the total cost of the installation, whether it's on a rooftop or whether it's in a huge solar field with thousands of panels. This is a portion of that piece. So for residential, we're looking at maybe a 10% increase in costs.
What does a solar panel cost these days?
The modules themselves are just a component. We typically look at the price per watt of the whole system. And typically right now in the Illinois market, systems are installing for about $3.50 to $4 per watt. In the California market, it's somewhere between $3 to $3.50. So where you have a lot more skilled labor, you have a lot more, we have very high customer acquisition costs here in Illinois because most of the time I spend explaining that it's okay that it snows, your solar panels are going to work the rest of the year.
And we do get sun here in Chicago.
Yeah, and so we have a lot of education hurdles to overcome in California. Everybody has a neighbor who has a solar panel on their house.
I'm trying to get my head around this. So let's conjure up a bungalow, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a fairly average-sized roof. What can you put on that roof, and what is that? How many watts can you get out of a roof like that?
So if I'm using a 300-watt panel, let's say I do 20 of them, I'm going to get about a 6-kilowatt system, and that's going to be somewhere around $20,000 before incentives. Now there's a 30% federal tax credit, and the state of Illinois also has some separate incentives. So that brings that cost down to less than $10,000.
So you could put that on your house for about $10,000, but it would not carry your entire electric load.
It depends entirely on how much you use. It's shocking the differences that I see.
Yeah.
Just this week alone, like for example, I am a complete miser. I'm always trying to figure out how much I can do, or how little electricity I can use.
Yeah.
So I'm using about 150 kilowatt hours a month. Most families are using about 1,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 150
I'm ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah, I am practically a Luddite.
Do you even have air conditioning? or anything?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I live in Chicago. I live in
Right.
Chicago, so like most, I don't, and I'm lucky that I have a good tree-lined street.
And of course, you long ago replaced all your light bulbs with LEDs
Exactly.
and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So
for the most, don't go back to your first question.
Yeah,
so
let's get
for
back
most
to
of the
that.
time, that 6-kilowatt system, those 20 panels, typically are going to do about 80 to 90% of your electric load for the average home.
Okay. But I'm trying to get a handle on. I think you and I agree that at first, when Trump announced this, everybody was freaking out and saying, oh my God, this is going to kill solar and all that. My sense of it has been that after calming down and reading the fine print, we're not as freaked out as we were 48 hours ago. But Is that right? I mean, is that the way? Is that kind of the way it's been working for you?
Well, the industry's been ready. We've seen this coming since April, August, when the proceedings actually started. So we anticipated, once the election was over in 2016, one of the campaign promises was he was going to impose a tariff. He did not know what industry, so this was just a present coming to him with a bow on it. And so we anticipated there would be something. Once harm was found by the U.S. manufacturers that filed the suit, the commissioners had a range, and this is closer to the upper parts of the range. It's interesting, I don't think it's high enough to break those imports coming into the market, nor is it high enough to have the impact of helping those manufacturers that are here in the U.S. So the only people that are really going to get hurt really probably are the consumers who are trying to buy it and the small businesses who are trying to install it.
So it sounds like it's really just kind of an annoyance.
It's an annoyance.
Yeah.
No, that's a great way to describe it. And particularly the part that I am the most annoyed about, and I think the majority of the people who are in the solar industry are in it because we're trying to save the planet.
Yeah.
We are
burning. There's that.
We are burning this planet so fast, and
Yeah.
we have got to put every solution under the sun in place as quickly as possible, whether it's making sure that food gets composted and isn't rotting in landfill, to reducing our methane from fracking, to using solar instead of coal, and other dirty resources.
It's so interesting to me because in my lifetime, this is probably I would say this is the most promising thing that's come along in terms of, saving the planet. Oh, he's going to save the planet. But the manufacture of this product is relatively benign. It's not benign by any means, but there's less impact on the planet than for most certainly than fracking for gas or something like that. It requires a fairly intensive amount of labor to design, because every design is different. So you need skilled people who get paid fairly well, which is a great thing. And as you've said, about a third of a million people have been hired in just the last decade or so to do this. So it's like a win-win-win all the way around. And every time you finish a house, that's a little bit less electric load that's needed, which means a little bit less coal, a little bit less fracking, and even down the road, maybe a little bit less reliance on nuclear. So it wins in every category, it wins.
Yep.
So let's go put some tariffs on that and put the brakes on it a little bit.
Let's slow this game down.
Let's slow that down.
Yeah.
We don't need that.
No, it just doesn't make it defies all logic.
No sense at all.
None.
No sense whatsoever.
None.
Do you have any sense of, I'm just throwing something at you, it just occurred to me. I've never even thought about this myself, but in the last 15 to 20 years of installations of photovoltaic solar, how much of the electric load has been
Shifted?
Do you have any sense?
Well, in Illinois, solar alone is less than 1% of the whole grid. So we are way behind. We actually have a goal that was set over a decade ago that 25% of our power would come from clean resources by 2025. We were doing a great job with wind. We had some utility scale solar. And then when we deregulated in Illinois, we kind of broke the mechanism that was going to drive that forward.
Yeah.
We have fixed it, and we're in the process of releasing new rules so that people can play and participate in Illinois again. Nationwide, it's a very small percentage, but what's really interesting is that of all new generation that's coming online across the country, almost exclusively all of it is coming from clean resources. We're not necessarily building new coal plants, thanks very much to the hard work of the Sierra Club. Here in Chicago, we closed the Crawford and Fisk plants. So coal is going away, no matter how much people would like to save it. We can't have people living in these regions near these resources. But when you compare brand new solar, brand new wind, to brand new coal, brand new natural gas, brand new nuclear, brand new anything else, the numbers aren't, there is no comparison. The economics for new solar, new wind makes much better economic sense every day.
That's what makes it so interesting to see, as you say, virtually all of the new generation that's coming online is clean generation, and it's not because people are moral and ethical and they want to do the right thing for the planet. It's because finally it's cheap enough.
Right, exactly. And what's exciting is that we're seeing this happening country after country around the globe. And unfortunately, this is just one more opportunity where the U.S. is going to fall behind. We could be a leader. This is technology that we developed. We built something so amazing that we sent it to space and allows people to live outside of our orbit. And yet the U.S. is doing everything, it seems, to just slow that down.
So could we talk a little bit about, well, there's a couple of areas I want to make sure we talk about. We've been talking almost exclusively about small solar on top of your roof and everything. But there's a whole different division of solar, right, which is industrial sized. You take an old brownfield of, 100 acres and you just fill it with solar panels. And as far as I can tell, there's no environmental disadvantage to that because it was a piece of land that was already, polluted and degraded. How will that be affected by these?
So that's actually the most exciting part. Now, the tariff is going to slow that down, which is unfortunate because that is some of the most expensive land that we can build on because we need to do other mitigation. Right. But if we just look at Waukegan, for example, we have destroyed so much of the land in Waukegan that the vast majority of industry has left. There are no jobs, and so that brings down the property values, which brings down the school system. By putting solar and instead using that land that has been long forgotten and abandoned, if we instead put solar fields, we now have something that the local community can tax. We are using land that we've already destroyed, so I don't need to use a good farm field in southern Illinois. Right. But we are repurposing and bringing clean energy to people who probably are victims of economic injustice, who probably have health issues because they have lived near these dirty resources, whether it's that dirty coal plant that's just over the border in Wisconsin, which is closing, or just the pollution that's been left behind already. So solar is a fantastic way of solving a lot of problems, and then we can have a better school system in the Waukegan area, which then will bring more small business, will raise the community up. The more you educate your kids, the better your community values will be. So it's just a win. The wins just stack up more and more and more.
One thing it doesn't do is bring you jobs, because there's almost no jobs in this, right? I mean, the jobs, there's lots and lots of jobs to build it. But once it's built, it just kind of runs itself.
And that's the difference. So Chicago actually can lay claim to the largest urban developed solar field. We have 10 megawatt system in West Pullman. I believe that is one permanent job doing the ongoing maintenance. And there's a guy out there every single day looking at there's 32,000 panels out there. And so he's making sure that system's completely operational. I believe it took about 150 to 200 jobs locally to build that array. So those were great jobs. Unfortunately, we have so much brownfield across the country that there are those jobs, just like with the land.
That's probably a career, right? Just going around building brownfield.
Exactly. So the vast majority of the jobs will be rooftop solar. Just look at, as you're driving out of the city, all those warehouses, all those big, huge flat rooftops. We could be filling that, and those are tons of jobs right there. So the brownfield utility scale stuff, that is a big way that we can move the needle environmentally and electrically, less so on the jobs sector. But here in Illinois, we've got a lot of ancillary businesses as well. So the wire manufacturers and the distributors and so there's lots of other industries that will actually benefit.
I mean, it all just fits together in such a weird way. I mean, today we're looking at, I don't know, just in the last week or so, about 400 or 500 stores have been announced to be closed, many of them big box stores, and it occurs to me that may be one use. I can't even imagine what we're going to do with all the Kmart stores and all these, what will eventually be thousands of vacant stores, because we don't need stores anymore.
As we lose retail.
But, at least those roofs could be used for something. I mean, they could just become solar farms, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Because we need the space, and we don't want to be ripping up farmland and pristine desert and all that to do it. I lost my place. There were a bunch of things I wanted to talk to you about, the difference between the two. But the the biggest question, I guess, that's still on the table is, and I think you've answered this, but will this tariff slow or retard the installation of solar in the United States?
I think it will slow us down. Some of the early numbers are it might slow us down by about 10% or by a couple of years of where we thought we would be. We were already kind of expecting a bit of a dip in the future because some of the federal incentives are going away, but the industry was already recovering from those. So, as we see, for example, a lot of the soft costs are going down, and that's going to offset these tariffs. For example, municipalities, they're learning how, as they start getting more and more requests to permit it, they're getting faster and more efficient at it. And so some of those soft costs, right now, we spend a lot of time educating just the municipality on, here's the things you should look for when you inspect our project. And once they know that, all those soft costs, that time that we invest in that, that will all go away. So, I think, unfortunately, it's going to dim a little, not to use, an optic, but, but it will dim a little, but it certainly is not going to put the lights out. So it's unfortunate because we could be doing so much more, so much faster.
And that was the other thing that I was trying to think of just a second ago, is that the other piece of this, kind of the other side of it, is innovation. We've talked about that a little bit, but these cheap panels from China and Malaysia and all that, they're still kind of an older technology, and I mean they're crystalline, right, or whatever it is. And one of the roles that the United States may be able to play in this is innovating those next 3, 4, 5 generations of technology. But if we're putting the brakes on things, we're putting the brakes on innovation too, and that is even worse because that's going to have an effect 10 years, 20 years down the road.
And I think that's a frightening prospect amongst all high-end technologies, whether, again, it's my cell phone,
Right.
and I think we need to, America needs to figure out what we're great at. What we're great at is innovation.
Absolutely
We don't
right.
necessarily have to have the factories. I would love to have more workers, but let's have high-skilled jobs here. Let's continue to invest in science and research. Let's support our national labs. Here in Chicago, we're so lucky we have Fermilab and we have Argonne, but let's continue to be the innovators.
Right.
Sadly, what I worry is that steps like this will just leave us in a void.
It's interesting because I was thinking yesterday about in the 1930s, the rural electrification, for example, where in the space of, I don't know, in probably a decade, millions and millions of houses that were never built with electrical wiring in them were wired. People, electricians and plumbers, well, carpenters particularly, and everybody else got in there to put the service wiring in and to put the electrical outlets and the lighting and everything in, and then to string the wires and manufacture the wire and deliver the wire and all that. So thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs were created for that. And we're in one of those phases right here, right now.
Right.
Because when you put those panels on the roof, you have to have inverter systems to sync them up with the electrical grid. You have to have all kinds of wiring and conduits and clips and everything else that is involved. This is a lot of jobs. This is a lot of work. And we're focusing on the couple of thousand people in America who are still manufacturing panels that frankly are kind of a little bit out of date. It seems that way to me anyway. But let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the just millions of other bits and pieces that are involved in this, but we just don't seem to have the ability to see that.
Yeah, no, it's maddening, and and it's the same. You can translate it to a number of things that this administration is focused on. Saving coal jobs. There's more people employed in the solar industry than in coal, oil, and gas combined. Combined.
Yeah.
In our and people don't realize that that's how large solar is. I think a lot of people just assume that it still is a niche.
Yeah.
It is no longer a niche, it is a mainstream. And I encourage people to start looking up because there's solar panels in your community. Just start looking at rooftops.
$9 billion industry,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm just curious a little bit. We always talk about Chicago here. How do you do installations in the city, I assume, right?
Primarily, yeah.
Yeah. How is it working with the city? Is the city giving you a hard time about it? Are they willing to accept innovation, or are you running into this whole thing about, oh no, you can't do it this way and that way?
Chicago's been phenomenal. I will say that Chicago has been really great to work with. When people first started doing photovoltaics, and my company Solar Service has been doing solar for 40 years, most of it was solar hot water. We shifted to photovoltaics. And when I started personally going down to the building department, I had permits that took over a year to pull. And the city recognized that that was a problem. So they actually received a grant from the Department of Energy. It was called a Sunshot Grant. And to pull a solar permit today on a standard residential house takes me 1 day.
You got to be kidding me.
From a year
Now,
to
see,
a day.
I hear this stuff all the time, but
true.
I've never actually talked to someone who's actually been the
recipient
of one of these.
3
it
permits.
really works?
I picked up 3 permits
Wait a minute,
yesterday
are you
that
telling
we
me the
submitted
city
on
of Chicago
Monday.
is doing it right? Is that what
Doing
you're
it right.
telling me? And that the city of Chicago has been innovative on this?
Now, it does take a little bit of time. Their forms
Well,
are a
it
little bit
should.
complicated,
It
but it
should.
should, right? I'm
Right.
doing something complex to your
Right.
roof. But once you have all the city forms filled in,
Yeah.
it takes 1 day for the city to review it.
I mean, yes, let's not go overboard here. You're going to be tearing into people's roofs. You're going to be adding weight to the roof, which needs to be evaluated. You're going to tear into their electrical system and all that. So it's not something that should just be done without oversight. And so there's a balance.
Right.
Well, all right, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
so Chicago's doing a great job, and a lot of other communities are. The Metropolitan Mayor Caucus has been working actually with an organization called the Solar Foundation to educate mayors, and they will be announcing soon that I believe 14 communities have received bronze, gold, or silver status in terms of advancing solar policy in their communities.
Why hasn't Commonwealth Edison cut your legs off?
Well, we had a lot of negotiating when we did the Future Energy Jobs Act, and I think that ComEd has been pretty public about wanting to be a utility of the future. I think they recognize that solar is part of it. Commonwealth Edison cannot own generation, and so they will be supporting it through what's called a renewable energy credit. There was, we had a lot of back and forth during the negotiation process. Yeah. Some of it was hard, some of it was easier, but we were really excited to have a bill that passed in Springfield in December of 2016 that the governor signed that we're now enacting.
Because actually Commonwealth Edison still collects energy from
They do all the
your-
billing
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah, so they own all the wires,
So
and
they
they do
still
all the
have,
billing.
there's still plenty of work for them to do.
So they will do, in terms of solar, they are in charge of the interconnection. So they want to know if I'm putting solar on my roof, that I'm also might be backfeeding electricity
Right,
to
right,
them.
right.
But then they also manage a program that's called net metering, and that's an agreement between the homeowner, the system owner, and the utility that any excess power will be credited. Now we see this as a big battle across many states,
Yeah,
but here
yeah.
we actually protected it through legislation. So right now it is protected up until we get to 3% of the grid. You will get full retail net metering, which means that for every kilowatt hour of energy that you put onto the grid, it is the exact same value of kilowatt energy that you bring from the utility. When we get to 3%, we're going to do a study. Minnesota, when they did their study on the value of solar, they actually found that it was worth more because of the clean attributes of it. So at 3%, that will trigger the Illinois Commerce Commission to do a study that will then enact rates at 5%. And we'll be very interested, and the Illinois Solar Energy Association will be very vocal in that process to make sure that all of the variables are factored into that calculation.
And we haven't even begun to talk about wind, which also figures into this in other ways, because I think Commonwealth Edison and others have gone into that big time with these giant wind farms that we see south of here, and those help to supply the load at night, so that's important too.
Right. Well, and as we were talking about innovation. As we start to get more innovative, so oftentimes the wind that's produced at night, because people aren't using it, so our grid is using less, and so now it's the creative application of battery technology, which is the direct result of increased electric cars and portable devices like phones and laptops. And so really starting to get smart about how we use our power and when we generate it and and where it needs to be at the most. So solar is a perfect fit with the grid because we're producing power at the highest times that it's needed. And so at noon, I'm singing all day because I'm making electrons constantly, and instead of buying it from a dirty peaker power plant.
Right. When do you need it the most? On hot, sunny days.
Exactly,
right?
and that's when
guess
it's
what?
the most.
That's when you're.
And the opposite's true with wind. Wind does a great job. And so, a lot of people are charging their electric cars at night, commonly at a negative rate. And so it's really like we need to step back and look at the future of the grid, future of electricity. Electricity is such a huge part of how we function on a day-to-day basis. Let's be smart.
It's interesting to me that I've never really thought this through carefully, but Commonwealth Edison was a unique utility in the fact that it was so it innovated, you could say, by getting into nuclear in such a big way when that was the thing. And it also had a lot of coal plants, and it got out of the coal business, by offloading those companies. But it suddenly was in the position of being this utility that was different from a lot of other utilities where they were just basically coal and that was all they had. So they really kind of, if they're going to survive, they've got to innovate. They have to figure out ways to get through these new technologies. And when you think about Elon Musk talking about these battery packs, every house will have a battery pack, which I guess it seems a bit crazy to me at this point, but that could happen, and when that happens, then the whole system is kind of ballasted, and it becomes kind of almost self-sustaining. It's an amazing thing to think about where we could be in 20 years.
And that's why when people think, oh, you have to have so much land in order to do everything that we need. But that's if you don't think creatively. Look at all the rooftops that we have. It's phenomenal, the number of rooftops we have. Add in the brownfields that we have as well. We don't necessarily need to convert land. The figures are really astonishing at just how, I think it's if every U.S. state did 100 square miles of solar, it would fill their entire electrical needs, and that's just using solar.
100 square miles.
And one of the factors, because people say all the time, you can't do everything that we need to do just using solar. In reality, for just 1 hour of sunshine that strikes the surface of the earth, we have enough electricity, if we turned that sunshine into electricity, to power all of humanity for an entire year. 1 hour,
That's fascinating.
one day, a whole year. So we just
we'll
need to get smart about it.
Take a big battery to keep it overnight.
Right? But so even decades ago, Buckminster Fuller was looking at this, and he was like, well, what if electricity just followed the sun? And we just kept transmission flowing.
As the Earth turns, you just you have a universal grid, a planet-wide grid.
And let's put solar panels around the equator. There's many solutions if we're just committed to finding them. And that's before we even add in wind or hydro or many of the other clean technologies. We don't necessarily need nuclear, we don't need coal, we don't need natural gas. I see those as transition fuels, which I'm sure they would not like to be considered a transition fuel, but really their day is over. We ride horses for pleasure now.
Yeah, and that really is true. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't have coal and coal electric power in the 30s and 20s and 40s and so forth. So it had its day. It did a lot of damage, but that was the price we had to pay for it. And similarly now, I see the same thing with fracking gas. It's sort of like, it's better, it's a little cleaner, but it's nothing more than a transitional thing, and it can't last all that much longer. When that runs out, we've got to be ready.
Well, and I think natural gas has done a great job of positioning itself as cleaner.
Clean, yeah.
But as science is learning more about methane and the heat trapping properties of it, we're finding actually that it's not. And unfortunately, when you look, just this morning I was reading an article on the permafrost melting in Siberia and the methane that's being released there. So, we didn't know what we didn't know. But we do now.
Well, and
we didn't know the impact, of dirty pollution, but we know it today, and we need to start striving for something better. I'm no longer using a rotary phone. I'm no longer, I'm no longer using an LP record. There's many technologies that have gotten us to where we were, but But we're no longer using them today, and so we need to apply the same application to energy.
And of course, the other part to all of this is, could you imagine if we could take 2 billion cars and shift them over to renewable energy? Wouldn't that be something?
I'm sure that the pedestrians in Beijing would like to see something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you coming down here today. I as you can tell, I could just go on and on and on about this. I think we are at an absolutely miraculous moment. It's wonderful to be alive right now, to be watching this transition and to see it actually happening before our very eyes every day. It's getting bigger and better. And we talked about transitional energies. Maybe this is just transitional politics, and it'll only be around for a few years, and more enlightened views will take place, or maybe even this will work out on its own. I don't know.
I think you're right, and it really comes down to what governments are interested in making these investments and paving the way. China today, as much as they are bashed for pollution, China today is installing more solar energy in a quarter than the United States installed last year. So it just is up to political will and whether people have the foresight to move towards the future.
Right before we turned the cameras on, you and I were talking about that very same thing, and I want to say it again. The United States in the last 40 to 50 years has been a global innovator in attempting to mitigate polluting sources. And we haven't done a spectacular job on it, but we've done a good job. And our total emissions in this country today are dramatically lower than they were before. The downside of that is that it allows another generation of people to come in and say, well, things aren't that bad. We can keep fracking gas for another 30 years. It's not going to make any difference. And that's one of the disappointments that I feel is that instead of seeing we've reached this level, now let's really kick it up and get to that level, I'm sensing that we're losing that innovative edge, that innovative impulse. I hope that's not true.
Well, and the urgency.
The urgency is a whole different.
Because I think many are trying to just sit back on our laurels and not recognize. I mean, we remember the commercial with the Native American Indian canoeing down a river, and it was completely disgusting. And there were bicycles and tires, and many of our rivers, no longer look like that. We have done a tremendous amount of cleaning up and protecting our environment, and that was a Republican idea. The EPA was started with Richard Nixon, and frankly, it's a crime to see what is happening right now to the EPA across the United States. And we cannot sit on those laurels. We need to go back to our history books to remember lakes and rivers that were on fire. Water that could not be consumed. We are blessed here in the United States because we have clean water. For how long? Many countries don't have that resource. So we need to keep our eyes open and keep moving forward.
Really enjoyed talking to you today. Thanks.
Me too.
Thanks
you
for coming
so much,
down
Ken.
here. This has been great. Lisa Albrecht is with the Illinois Solar Energy Alliance and also works for Solar Service over in Niles, where they've been doing, you said 40 years? Did I hear you right? You've been doing solar for 40 years?
Nothing more. Solar for 40 years.
Wow. So then you were doing solar when it was
brand new.
Well, I mean, it was like the water was being pumped up onto the roof, right?
Right. The majority of our systems for the first 30 years of our history were solar hot water systems, where we capture the heat of the sun in the direct form it's coming. With solar electricity, we're doing a chemical conversion. With solar hot water, the sun comes to us as a form of heat.
So you just pump the water up to the roof and let it heat up and then pump
Even
it
on a
around.
0 degree day inside of a solar collector, it can be 170 degrees. We're using it at 120 at top temperatures.
And it really, actually, just 3 or 4 years ago, that was a really hot thing, right? But now solar, I guess, as we said before, we're repeating ourselves, but Solar has become so inexpensive that you can put a solar array on your roof that'll do the same thing, and you don't have all that plumbing and all those other issues that you could have.
Well, and it's a little easier to track. Plus, anything extra that I use from solar electricity, I can feed back to the grid. If I created hot water, I'm not necessarily going to send that back to people's gas. They're not interested.
Okay, all right, we've got to stop. All
right. By the way, at the close, you said Illinois Solar Alliance, but it's Illinois Solar Energy Association.
ISEA.
ISEA.
Just look up the ISEA, okay? All right, Lisa, thank you very much, and we will continue this conversation because it's the most important conversation we have.
Thank you for covering it, Ken.
Doing it. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV, as you always do, and we're so glad you do because, we got a lot to talk about. And we'll be back again next week. I just forgot what we're doing next week, but it's really important. You got to watch it. Got to check us out next week, too. So we'll see you then. And don't forget, you can go to this address any old time you want and see this and all of our other programs. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks to Craig Newman for sitting in for me last week. Appreciate that, Craig. Thanks a lot. See you next week here on Chicago Newsroom on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Bye for now.